Today, I'm speaking with Sella Nevo. Sella is director of the Meselson Center and a senior information scientist at RAND. He's also a venture partner at the climate-focused VC firm First Time and an advisory board member of AllFed, the Alliance to Feed the Earth in Disasters.
Why protect model weights?
The work that we did over the past year focused specifically on the confidentiality of the weights, which is a way of saying we want to make sure that the model weights are not stolen. And the reason we decided to at least start there is because the model weights represent kind of a unique culmination of many different costly prerequisites for training advanced models. So to be able to produce these model weights, you need significant compute. It was estimated that GPT-4 cost $78 million and thousands of GPU years. Gemini Ultra cost nearly $200 million, and these costs are continuing to rise rapidly. A second thing you need is enormous amounts of training data. It's been rumored to be more than 10 terabytes of training data for GPT-4. You need all those algorithmic improvements and optimizations that are used during training that you mentioned. So if you can access the weights directly, you bypass at least hundreds of millions of dollars and probably in practice a lot more that comes with talent and infrastructure and things like that are not counted in the direct training cost. But on the other hand, as soon as you have the weights, computing inference from a large language model is, usually less than half a cent per 1,000 tokens. So
right.
These costs are, there's still some compute involved, but it's negligible. There are other things you need. Maybe you need to know the exact architecture, and you can't always fully infer that from the weights. Obviously, you need to have some machine learning understanding to kind of be able to deploy this. But these are all fairly small potatoes relative to, being able to produce the weights yourself. So there's a lot of value in kind of getting to those weights. And critically, once you do that, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So, a lot of other defenses that labs may have in place no longer apply. So if there's monitoring over the API to make sure you're not doing things you're not supposed to, that no longer matters because you're running it independently. If there are guardrails that are kind of trained into the model to prevent it from doing something, we know you can kind of fine-tune those away. And so those don't really matter. Right. So really there's almost nothing to stop an actor from being able to abuse the model once they have access to the weights.
Is there value limited by the fact that once you've kind of got the model weights, that model will soon be surpassed by kind of the next generation of frontier models?
I think that really depends what the attacker wants to use them for or what you as the defender are worried about. If we're thinking about this kind of like global strategic competition considerations, which countries will have the most capable models for let's say economic development, for economic progress and things like that, then I think that's relevant. Still, stealing the models might give an attacker, years of advantage relative to where they would have been otherwise. I'm most concerned about just the abuse of these models to do something terrible. So if we were to evaluate a model and know that you can use it to do something terrible, I don't really care that, the company a few months later is even more capable. Still, someone can abuse it to do something terrible.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
The SolarWinds hack.
So one attack that is often called the SolarWinds hack began in 2019. Let's start with the end. So it installed backdoors, which are kind of hidden ways to get into the system that the attacker can then abuse whenever they want. They installed backdoors in 18,000 organizations.
Whoa.
And then those backdoors were used to install malware in more than 200 organizations that the attackers chose as kind of high-value targets. These included Microsoft, Cisco, the cybersecurity firm FireEye. It included the U.S. Department of Commerce, Treasury, State, Homeland Security, the Pentagon, and others. It included NATO, other organizations in the UK government, the European Parliament. So they got a lot with one hack. This is estimated to have been done by a Russian espionage group that's sometimes referred to as Cozy Bear. There's a lot of fun names in the cybersecurity industry, which is sponsored by Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. So This is an example of what's called a supply chain attack. So in a supply chain attack, instead of directly attacking whoever you're interested in, you can attack software or hardware or other infrastructure that they use. Okay, so they're part of their supply chain. This is incredibly powerful because you can attack software that lots of people use simultaneously, and that's how you get to these kinds of scales. But also, the infrastructure that we all use is just enormous. And so there are endless kind of vulnerabilities hiding in its depth, making this more plausible and feasible. What they did is they used SolarWinds update mechanism. So, whenever you have software updates, really what your computer is doing is getting a message from the internet that says, hey, here's a new executable that's better than the one you have. How about you update it? Usually this is okay. There are signatures on the files that help you ensure that the company that you trust is the one who sent them. Not anyone can send you files over the internet. But they put in a backdoor so that the attackers as well could send whatever executable they want. So they did this for, as I mentioned before, 18,000 organizations that downloaded updates from SolarWinds. And then they kind of cherry-pick the organizations that they want to use the backdoor to actually install malware.
Right.
What that malware did is first it kind of lurked silently for about 2 weeks, and then saying that everything's okay, it reached out to command and control servers that could tell it what to do. So for example, things that they told this malware to do is copy and send various types of sensitive information, including emails, documents, certificates, and directions for kind of expanding throughout the network beyond the original devices that were compromised. And just to kind of sum this up, they had about, after they were caught, it was estimated they had about 14 months of unfettered and undetected access to these organizations. And maybe one final thing that I think was interesting about this specific attack is sometimes, malware is self-propagating. It automatically tries to get wherever it can and so on. This was not an example of that. So even though they were active in 200 organizations, every single attack was manually controlled by a human on the other side. Wow. Which tells you something about, their interests and kind of what they were looking for and how much they were willing to invest in this.
Yep. Holy cow. This is insane. Do we know kind of what the outcome was, like what Russia was able to learn or do using kind of this malware?
Yeah, so we know which networks were compromised. We had mentioned this before, quite a lot of very interesting networks. We know that they did send copy and send very large amounts of information. The content of that information, we don't fully know. When it's on the government side, it's often remains confidential or classified. And even with private companies, they often try to downplay the effect that it's a bit hard to know exactly what was taken.
Sure.
But we're pretty confident it was a lot.
0 days.
There's a lot of different components to a cyber attack. There's kind of getting into the network. There's called lateral movement, so indeed moving within the network. Maybe the weights are protected in various ways. Maybe they're encrypted. Maybe they're inside a protected device. You would need to overcome those kind of defenses. There's other things to make sure that you're undetected. All of these can use vulnerabilities to achieve all of those goals. And all of those vulnerabilities would be called 0 days if you're the first one to find them, if they have not yet been publicly reported. Okay,
so why are you particularly worried about this kind of attack?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm particularly worried about many attacks. But there's a few things that are interesting here. So one is, it's just incredibly common. We know this happens all the time. We know it's kind of the bread and butter of information security attacks. Secondly, machine learning infrastructure in particular is shockingly insecure, more so than other types of software infrastructure. There's two things I think driving this. One is just the fact that the industry is advancing at such a rapid pace. Everyone is rushing to go to market. And this is true from the hardware level to the software level. GPU firmware is usually unaudited, which is not true for a lot of other firmware. The software infrastructure that people use for training and for monitoring their training runs has these like enormous sprawling dependencies, We mentioned supply chain attacks before. There have been already vulnerabilities introduced to these systems. Some of these infrastructure say in their documentation, they say, this is not meant to be used in a secure environment. But these are key infrastructure that is used in all machine learning systems.
Wow.
So really the situation with machine learning infrastructure is particularly bad, and we're quite far from even reaching the kind of standard practice for software systems, which in and of itself is not, that great.
Yep. Okay.
There's another thing that I'm worried about, and I think more commercial companies should be worried about, again, as this kind of moves on to not just being worried about cyber criminals, but about nation states, which is that if you're a nation state, you can cheat in how you get 0 days. So, for example, China has a convenient set of regulations titled Regulations on the Management of Network Product Security Vulnerabilities. And broadly, what that regulation says is that any researcher or any organization that has any footprint in China is required to report any vulnerabilities that they find to the government, which we know that the government then hands off to their offensive cyber organizations. And simultaneously, they also put severe penalties if you share that information with almost any other organization. So you should not be surprised that China then has, dozens or hundreds, or I don't know exactly how many 0 days of their own. And then maybe another way that you can get, huge amounts of 0 days is even if you're not a state, but you're, a sufficiently capable actor, maybe you're like in the OC4 level or OC5, you can hack into the channels through which 0 days are reported. So even if other people find vulnerabilities, they have to report to the company somehow. There's a lot of different infrastructure in place for that. If you can get access to that infrastructure, you get a continuous stream of all new 0 days that anyone can find.
Side channel attacks.
For centuries, when people tried to kind of understand communication systems and how they can undermine their defenses, for example, encryption, you want to know what some encrypted information is. They looked at the inputs, there's some text that we want to encrypt, and there are outputs, here's the encrypted text. At some point, someone figured out, what about all other aspects of the system? What about the system's temperature? What about its electricity usage? What about the noise it makes as it runs? What about the time that it takes to complete the actual encryption? And we tend to think of computation as abstract. That's what digital systems are meant to do, to kind of abstract out. But there's always some physical mechanism that actually is running that computation. And physical mechanisms have physical effects on the world. So it turns out that all these physical effects are super informative, okay? And let me just give a very simple one. There's a lot of things here with, as I mentioned, temperature and electricity and things like that. But let me give a very simple one. RSA, famous type of encryption, it calculates as part of its operation, it takes one number and takes it to the power of another number. Okay, pretty simple. I'm not trying to say something too exotic here. To do that, an efficient way of calculating this thing is primarily uses multiplication and squaring. For whatever reason, that's an efficient way of doing that. It turns out that the operation to multiply two numbers and the operation to square a number uses a different amount of electricity. And so if you track the electricity usage over time, you can literally identify exactly what numbers it's working with and break the encryption within minutes. Okay?
Wow.
That's an example of a side channel attack. Just to give, this is a bit of an old one. It's been known for I don't remember the exact time, but well over a decade. But to give kind of a more modern one, just a year ago, there was a new paper showing that you can run malware on a cell phone. We all, cell phones often are not our work devices. We think of them as maybe our personal devices, and things like that. Through the cell phone, you can, with the cell phone's microphone, listen to someone typing in their password and identify what their password is. Because it sounds slightly differently when you're tapping different keys.
Do you mean physical keys on a slightly older cell phone, or do you mean like my iPhone, which has digital keys on a touchscreen?
Oh, sorry, just to clarify. So I actually don't mean them typing their password on their phone. I mean their phone is on the desk. They are typing their password into their work computer. You identify what is the password on the work computer.
Holy crap. That is wild.
And let me just add, I think that, one recent concern is, as cloud computing is becoming more common, side channel attacks are a huge problem. Often when you run something on on the cloud, you share a server with others, and therefore you're sharing certain resources. So a lot of people can directly or indirectly see actually, how much processing your application is using and things like that. And if they're smart, they can infer information in your application. So that is a huge kind of area of potential information leaks in cloud computing.
USB cables.
Let's put kind of highly secure air-gapped networks aside for a moment, okay, and just talk about, getting a USB to connect to a network. It's worth flagging that this is a really easy thing to do. So one thing that people will do, and this is not just nation states and whatnot, this is random, hackers that want to do things for the fun of it, can just drop a bunch of USB sticks in the parking lot of an organization, and someone will inevitably be naive enough to be like, oh no, someone has dropped this. Let's plug it in and see who this belongs to. And you're done. Now you're in, and you can spread in the internal network. This happens all the time. It's happened multiple times in multiple nuclear sites in the United States. So yeah, this is a pretty big deal.
That's unreal.
Now, I think that many people like you will find that surprising. I think folks who are like security folks are kind of like being like, oh, well, no one would, everyone in security knows that you shouldn't plug in a USB stick.
Pick up a USB stick, yeah.
But let me challenge even those folks who think that this is obvious, and also in that way bring it back to kind of the more secure networks we were talking about before. So indeed, like organizations with serious security know not to plug in random USB sticks.
Yep.
But what about USB cables? So Luisa, let me ask you actually. So if you needed a USB cable and you just like saw one in the hallway or something,
100% I would use it.
Would you use it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure I've literally already done that.
So here's an interesting fact, which I think even most security folks don't know. So you could actually buy a USB cable, not a USB stick, a USB cable for $180 that is hiding a USB stick inside and can communicate wirelessly back home. So once you stick that cable in, an attacker can now control your system from far, not even in the mode that I mentioned before of like, oh, you wait until the USB stick will be put in again. It just continuously can communicate with and control your system. I guarantee you that if you toss that cable into a tech organization's cables shelf, I guarantee it'll be plugged in.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's really crazy. Yeah, has that been used in the real world?
I don't know. There's a company that's selling them, so I don't know if I haven't seen reports of when it's been used, but presumably if it's a product on the market, someone is buying it.